My own brother drove me to the edge of a mountain road, opened my door, and pushed me out. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me once and drove away. That was 4 months ago. Last week, I walked back into my mother's house, and what I found there made me wish I had stayed gone. My name is Tara. I'm 31 years old. I used to work as a physical therapist at a clinic in Asheville, North Carolina. I had a small apartment with good light in the mornings, a rescue cat named after a character from a book I loved in college, and a life that felt, if not exciting, at least solid, real, mine. My brother's name is Curtis. He's 5 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one our dad took to baseball games on Saturdays while I stayed home with our mom folding laundry and watching old movies. That never bothered me much. Curtis and I were never close, but we weren't enemies either. We were just two people who happened to share a last name and a childhood. Thanksgiving felt a little awkward sometimes. That was it. Or at least, that's what I believed. When our father passed away 2 years ago, heart attack, sudden, no warning, everything shifted. Dad had built a small but real estate business over 40 years. 3 rental properties in western North Carolina, a commercial lot in Hendersonville, and a family home outside Brevard that had been in the family since the 70s. Not a fortune, but not nothing either. Enough to matter. Enough to change things. He left it split equally between Curtis and me. I remember the day the attorney read the will. Curtis sat across the table from me and smiled, that small, tight smile I'd seen on him before, the one that never quite reached his eyes. At the time, I thought he was just being civil. I thought we were both just processing grief. I was wrong about so many things. For the first few months, the estate was in probate, and there wasn't much to handle. Curtis and I exchanged emails through our respective attorneys. Everything was formal, professional. I assumed it would stay that way. Then in spring, he called me directly. His voice was different, warmer, softer. He said he'd been thinking about us, about how distant we'd grown, about how Dad would have wanted us to be closer. He said he was sorry for not being a better brother. I sat on my couch listening to him and felt something I hadn't expected, relief. Like something long locked had finally opened. He suggested we take a trip together, just us. Drive out to the Blue Ridge, spend a few days hiking, talking, clear the air before we finalized everything with the estate. I told my friend Joanna about it, and she said it sounded good, that maybe Curtis had grown up a little. I told my therapist, and she said it sounded healthy. Everyone thought it was a good idea. The drive up was fine. Curtis was relaxed, funny even. He had a playlist going. Older stuff, things we both remembered from car trips with our parents. We stopped for coffee at a gas station outside Weaverville, and he paid without being asked. He asked about my job, about my apartment, about whether I was seeing anyone. He seemed genuinely interested. I started to think that maybe this was the version of my brother that had always existed somewhere underneath everything. We stayed at a small inn the first night, had dinner at a place with exposed wood beams and a fireplace going even though it was late April. We talked about Dad. Actually talked. Not just the logistics of death, but real memories. The way he used to burn toast every single Sunday morning. The road trip we all took to the Outer Banks when we were kids, and Curtis and I fought so much in the back seat that Dad pulled over twice just to breathe. I laughed more that night than I had in months. The next morning we drove higher up into the mountains. The road narrowed, the trees thickened. Curtis said he wanted to show me a view he'd found years ago, one he'd never shared with anyone. I remember thinking that was a strange thing to say. Curtis wasn't the type to have secret places, but I didn't question it. I should have questioned it. The overlook was beautiful. No guardrail, just a wide shoulder of gravel and then nothing. A long drop into forest and valley below. We stood there for a few minutes. The air was cold and smelled like pine. I took a picture on my phone. Then I turned to say something to Curtis and realized he was standing very close behind me. There was something in his face. I'd never seen that expression on him before. Not anger, exactly. Something flatter than that. Like a door closing. He grabbed my arm and shoved me. I don't have a neat memory of what happened next. It's not like in movies where time slows down and everything becomes clear. It was fast and chaotic and terrifying. I hit the slope below the road. Not a sheer cliff, but a steep ravine, rocky and thick with brush. I tumbled. I grabbed for branches and found some, lost them. Something hit my shoulder. Something hit my head. And then I stopped. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I woke up, I was about 40 feet below the road in a hollow between two large rocks. My left shoulder felt wrong, badly wrong. My head was bleeding. I could hear my own breathing, but nothing else. No cars, no voices, just the sound of wind moving through trees. I tried to climb back up and couldn't. The slope was too steep, and my shoulder wouldn't cooperate. Every time I used my left arm, the pain was enough to make my vision go gray. I slid back down twice. The third time I stopped trying and just sat there with my back against a boulder and tried to think. My phone. I'd had it in my jacket pocket when I took that picture. I found it in the leaves about 3 feet away, face down. The screen was cracked badly, but it turned on. No signal. I kept it on, hoping. That night was the coldest I've ever been in my life. I had my jacket, but nothing else. I gathered leaves up against myself, like I'd read about once in some survival article, and I pressed close to the rock for whatever windbreak it offered, and I did not sleep. I just waited and tried not to think about what the morning would look like if nobody came. On the second day, I heard voices. Hikers. 2 of them passing along a trail I hadn't even realized was there, maybe 50 yards from where I was. I screamed until my throat gave out. One of them heard me. They both came down. The woman. Her name was something beginning with a B. I don't remember exactly. Everything from those first hours is blurry. Took one look at my shoulder and said very calmly that I needed to not move it. Her husband went for help. She stayed with me and gave me water and half a granola bar and talked to me about nothing in particular. Just kept talking, and I have never been so grateful for the sound of another human voice. They got me out. Search and rescue came with a stretcher. At the hospital in Asheville, I was treated for a dislocated shoulder, a grade 2 concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and significant bruising. The ER doctor asked me what happened. I told him I fell while hiking. I don't know why I said that. Maybe shock. Maybe I still couldn't make myself say the real sentence out loud. The hospital social worker came by the next day. She was kind, patient. She didn't push. She left her card. I lay in that hospital bed for 3 days thinking about Curtis, replaying the look on his face, trying to find an alternate explanation. That he'd slipped, that he'd reached for me and missed, that there was some version of events where it was an accident. But there wasn't. I'd seen his face. I knew what I'd seen. I also thought about the estate, the properties, the lot in Hendersonville, the house in Brevard where I'd grown up, where my mother still lived. My mother. I called the hospital's phone to reach someone. Not my mother, not yet, but a colleague from the clinic who I trusted. I told her I'd been hurt and that I was okay, but that I needed her not to tell anyone I'd called. I needed a few days to think. She was confused and scared, but she agreed. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until much later, was what was happening at home while I was lying in that bed. Curtis had told everyone I went hiking alone and didn't come back. He'd filed a missing person report himself, which I only learned about later and which, when I learned it, made me feel physically ill. He cried at a search briefing, apparently. A neighbor told my mother he seemed devastated. My mother spent those first days calling hospitals, calling rangers, calling anyone who might have seen me. I didn't know any of this. I only knew what was in front of me. A broken shoulder, cracked ribs, and a brother who had decided I was worth more dead than alive. I was released from the hospital with a sling and a prescription and a strong recommendation to follow up with an orthopedic specialist. I checked into a motel outside town under a different name. I paid cash from the emergency fund I kept in a small pouch in my jacket, which somehow survived the fall with me. I stayed there for 2 weeks. Then I rented a room from a woman who asked no questions, about 40 minutes outside the city. I took the orthopedic referral under a name that wasn't mine, and I healed slowly in a room with yellow curtains and a view of a garden. I won't explain why I didn't go to the police right away. I know how it sounds. I know what the reasonable thing to do would have been. But here's the truth. I was scared. Curtis had spent years doing the social things I'd never bothered with. He knew local officials. He was on a first-name basis with half of downtown Brevard. He coached youth soccer. He was a deacon at his church. If I walked in and said my brother pushed me off a mountain, I needed more than my word against his. I needed to understand exactly what he was doing, and I needed to be able to prove it. So I waited. I contacted an attorney I knew from a continuing education course years back, not local, based in Charlotte. I emailed her from a new account and laid out everything. She took it seriously. She told me what I needed. She also told me something I hadn't known, that Curtis had filed paperwork with the probate court 2 weeks after I disappeared, claiming that as the sole surviving heir, the estate should be transferred to him. Sole surviving heir. He'd assumed I was dead, and when I didn't show up dead, he'd move forward anyway. Over the next 3 months, I gathered what I could. My attorney worked on the legal side. I reached out carefully, very carefully, to my mother's neighbor, an older woman who'd known our family since before I was born, and asked her to help me understand what was happening at home. She was alarmed at first, frightened, but she believed me. She'd never quite trusted Curtis, she said, something about the speed with which he'd moved on from grief. She was the one who told me about the woman. Curtis had a girlfriend, had had her apparently for over a year. Her name was Daphne. She was 34, recently divorced, and she had 2 children. She was also, and this was the part that made my stomach drop, the daughter of the man who had been making low-ball offers on our Hendersonville lot for the past 18 months, offers Curtis had, without telling me, been seriously considering. The picture that formed was not complicated. Curtis needed full control of the estate. He needed me gone, and he'd found someone whose family stood to benefit from that. I don't know if Daphne knew the full plan. I hope she didn't. But I don't know. My attorney filed an emergency motion to halt the probate transfer. She did it in a way that didn't require revealing I was alive. Not yet. It bought us time. 4 months after Curtis pushed me off that mountain road, I was ready. I drove back to Brevard on a Sunday morning. My shoulder had healed enough that I could drive without pain. My ribs were fine. The concussion was long gone. I looked different from when I'd left. Thinner, hair longer. Something changed in my face that I couldn't quite name. Something harder, maybe. Or maybe just less innocent. I didn't go to my mother's house first. I went to my attorney, who had driven down from Charlotte. We reviewed everything one last time. Then I called the Transylvania County Sheriff's Department and spoke to a detective who had already been briefed by my attorney's office. He asked me several questions. He was professional. He told me to be careful. Then I drove to my mother's house. I sat in the parking lot of the Ingalls grocery store, 2 blocks away, for about 15 minutes. I watched the street. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Courage, maybe, or just the right moment. I walked up the front path and knocked on my own mother's door. She answered it herself. She was wearing her old blue cardigan, the one with the loose button on the 3rd snap that she'd been meaning to fix for 3 years. She looked at me and the color left her face entirely. Her hand went to her mouth. She made a sound I had never heard her make before. Not a word, not a sob. Exactly, just something that came from somewhere very deep. "Mom," I said, "I'm here, I'm okay." She pulled me inside and held me for a long time without saying anything. When she finally let go, I could see she was shaking. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "I kept telling myself I was crazy, that I was just grieving, but I knew. The way Curtis kept." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "He's been here almost every day," she said, "helping me go through your father's things, talking about what to do with the house." My chest tightened. What did he say about the house? She looked at me steadily. He said we should sell it, that it would be easier for me, that holding on to it wasn't healthy. She paused. "He brought Daphne here last week. He didn't introduce her exactly, but he brought her." I took my mother's hands. "I need you to listen to everything I'm about to tell you." She listened. She didn't interrupt. She asked one question at the end. "Why didn't you call me?" I told her the truth. I was scared. I needed to protect her too. If Curtis thought she knew, if he thought she might help me, I didn't know what he was capable of anymore. And that was real. That was not an overreaction. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "He came to your father's grave with me. 2 weeks after you disappeared. He stood there and he cried." She looked out the window. "I believed him." "I know, Mom. He's my son. I know." She turned back to me. Her face had gone from shock to something else, something colder and more resolved. "What do we do now?" What we did was call Curtis and ask him to come over. My mother made the call herself. She told him she needed help with something in the attic, some of Dad's old files. Normal. Nothing unusual. He said he'd be there in an hour. I waited in the kitchen. When I heard his car in the driveway, my hands were perfectly still. That surprised me. I'd expected to be scared. Instead, I felt completely calm. Not peaceful, not numb, but clear. Like everything had finally come into focus. I heard him come in through the front door, heard my mother say something in a measured voice, heard his footsteps in the hall. He walked into the kitchen and stopped. The color drained from his face so completely that for a moment he looked like a photograph of himself. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Hi, Curtis," I said. He took a step backward, then another. This isn't." He shook his head. "How are you?" "Alive," I said. "It was close, but I am. I don't know what you think happened, but—" "Don't," I said. Just that one word. He stopped. I laid it out for him. Not with anger. There was no point to anger, not anymore. I told him I remembered everything. The overlook, his face, both hands on my arm. I told him about the attorney, the emergency motion, the probate fraud. I told him the sheriff's department had been briefed. He tried 3 different explanations in about 90 seconds. He said I'd slipped and he panicked. He said I was confused from the head injury. He said he'd tried to look for me. Each one dissolved the moment it met air. Then 2 things happened at once. My mother held up her phone. She had been recording since before he walked in, and there was a knock at the door. The detective, right on schedule. Curtis sat down at the kitchen table very suddenly, like something had been cut from his legs. He didn't fight it. He didn't yell. He just sat there while the detective came in and read him his rights, and he looked, for the first time in as long as I could remember, exactly like what he was, someone who had made a calculated decision and lost. Daphne, I later learned, had not known. Her father had not been formally approached yet. The deal had never gone through. She was blindsided when she found out what Curtis had done, and she ended things with him immediately. I don't know if I believe the full story, but I also don't have the energy to stay angry at someone who was lied to. Curtis was charged with attempted murder and probate fraud. He is awaiting trial. The estate is in my name pending final probate. My attorney is thorough and I trust her. The house in Brevard is still standing. Still has the same porch we grew up on, still has the maple tree in the backyard that my father planted when Curtis was born, that was barely taller than me by the time I came along, and that is now enormous and full of birds in the morning. My mother and I sat on that porch the evening after everything happened. She had her tea and I had mine. Neither of us talked for a while. The light went gold through the trees and then went orange and then went. "You should have called me," she said finally. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry." She was quiet for another moment. "Your father would have been so angry at him." "I know." "He also would have been proud of you." I didn't say anything to that. I just held my mug and watched the last of the light go and thought about how strange it is what survives. Not just people. Other things. Trust, in some forms. The stubborn habit of loving someone even after they failed you. The way a front porch can feel like a whole world when you've been away long enough. I'm back in Asheville now. Different apartment. I let go of the old one while I was gone. New rescue cat, since the first one went to stay with Joanna and seems to have decided that arrangement was permanent. Joanna can keep him. She loves him more than I ever admitted. I went back to work 3 weeks ago. My patients don't know any of what happened. They know I had a shoulder injury and took some time. That's enough. Some things you live through. And then you just go on living. And you don't need everyone to know which things they were. But sometimes, when I'm driving home in the evenings on the highway through the mountains, and the light is hitting the ridgeline a certain way, I think about that overlook. The cold air. The way the valley looked from up there. All that distance between me and the ground below. And I think about my brother standing behind me, and I think about how completely I had trusted him. And then I think about the woman with the granola bar who sat with me in the dark and just kept talking. And I think about my mother's blue cardigan with the loose button. And I think about the detective who drove 2 hours on a Sunday morning to do his job right. There are people who want to push you down, but there are also people who climb down into ravines to find you. I try to remember both. Mostly lately, I try to remember the second kind. I keep coming back to one moment. Not the push, not the fall. Not even the cold of that first night alone in the ravine. It's the moment Curtis stood at my father's grave and cried. Because that's when I understood something that no one really wants to say out loud. The most dangerous kind of wrong isn't the kind done by strangers. It's the kind done by someone who has spent years learning exactly how much you trust them. What Curtis did wasn't just a crime. It was a calculation. He looked at our father's life's work, the properties, the lot, the house where we both grew up, and he decided that my share of it was worth more to him than my life. That's not a moment of rage or impulse. That's a decision made in full daylight, with clear eyes. And I think about that a lot. Not to stay angry, but because I think understanding it is the only honest response to it. When you face something that deliberate, you owe it to yourself to see it clearly. For a long time after I came home, people kept saying I was brave. My mother said it. Joanna said it. Even the detective said something like it on his way out the door. And I never knew how to respond, because bravery wasn't what I felt when I was hiding in a motel room outside Asheville, paying cash and eating gas station food and emailing an attorney on a new account. What I felt was something quieter and more stubborn than bravery. It was just the refusal to let what he did be the end of the story. That's different. Bravery sounds like a choice. What I felt was more like, I don't have another option. So I keep going. There's something about surviving something like that which forces a kind of clarity you can't manufacture any other way. You start to see exactly what you're made of, not in a heroic sense, but in the very plain sense of, what do I actually do when everything is taken from me? And what I did was think, slowly, carefully, one step at a time. I found an attorney. I gathered evidence. I waited until I had something real before I walked back through that door. That's not instinct. That's a choice you make over and over again, every morning when the fear is loudest, to use your head instead of just your pain. I think about my father sometimes. The maple tree he planted, the properties he built over 40 years, the way he thought he was leaving something behind for both of us. He couldn't have known what Curtis would become. Or maybe he did, a little, and hoped he was wrong. Either way, what he left behind survived, not because of Curtis, in spite of him. The house in Brevard is still there. My mother is still there. The porch is still there. And I am still here. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. The people who want to erase you are counting on the idea that what you carry can't survive without you. They're wrong. What you carry is exactly what survives. I try to live like that now. Not loudly, just honestly, carefully, and with my eyes fully open. That's the only real answer I've found to what happened on that mountain road. Not revenge, not bitterness. Just a very quiet, very deliberate decision to keep being here.